Sarah and I had just moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood on Long Island. It was one of those places where nothing exciting ever happened, which was perfect for us. We had rented a small house, cozy enough for the two of us, with a decent-sized backyard, shielded from the outside world by a tall wooden fence. The street was peaceful, tucked away from the main roads, with only a handful of houses around. To one side was a drainage basin surrounded by trees, and to the other side, our only visible neighbors, an older couple in their 60s, lived in silence. Across the street from us was a small patch of woods, which blocked the view of another drainage basin. It was the kind of place you might call idyllic. There was something off from the start that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the isolation, the quiet that felt a little too quiet, or maybe it was the house behind ours. There was just one house that could see into our backyard over the fence. It stood slightly taller than ours, with a second-floor window overlooking our space. We didn't think much of it at first. After all, it's not unusual for houses to have windows facing each other. But as the days passed, Sarah and I started to feel watched. It began with the fall cleanup. I was out in the yard, raking leaves, when I noticed them for the first time. Two figures, a middle-aged man and woman, standing at the upstairs window of the house behind ours, staring. They were just standing there, their faces pressed against the glass, watching me as I worked. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it. People are nosy sometimes, right? No harm in it. They didn't stop. Every time I went out into the yard, there they were, standing at the same window, watching. Their eyes followed my every move, never blinking, never shifting. It was as if they had nothing better to do than stand there and stare. Sarah noticed it too. "They're always there," she said one night, glancing nervously at the window. "Creepy. Why don't they ever leave?" I tried to reassure her, but I was just as creeped out. We pretended not to notice for as long as we could, but eventually it got to the point where Sarah refused to go into the backyard. She was too uncomfortable with those people watching us. Their presence felt invasive, almost sinister. One foggy afternoon, I decided to test something. While I was out raking, I looked up at the window and waved at them, trying to be friendly. They didn't wave back. They didn't even flinch. They just stood there, eyes locked on me, their expressions blank, almost lifeless. It sent a chill down my spine. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. "We should go introduce ourselves," Sarah suggested one evening after dinner. "Maybe if we meet them, it won't feel so weird." I didn't like the idea, but Sarah was persistent. We walked around the block to their house and rang the doorbell. After a long, tense wait, the door creaked open just a crack. A young man, probably in his 20s, peered out at us. His face was half hidden behind the door, and the house behind him was dark, eerily dark. "Hi," Sarah said, trying to sound cheerful despite the unsettling atmosphere. "We live behind you. We just wanted to introduce ourselves." The man didn't smile. He barely even acknowledged us. "What do you want?" His voice was cold, almost robotic. "We've noticed two people at the window a lot," I said, glancing at the upstairs window where the watchers always stood. "A man and a woman. We just wanted to say hello, maybe get to know our neighbors." The man's expression didn't change. "There's no one else here," I said flatly. Sarah and I exchanged uneasy glances. "But we've seen them. They're always at the window." "I don't know who you're talking about," the man said, his voice tinged with annoyance. Then, without another word, he shut the door in our faces. As we walked back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The man's reaction, the darkness of the house, the strange, unsettling energy, it all felt off. That night, I went upstairs to our bedroom, which had a window facing that same house. I peeked out, and there they were again. Man and woman standing at the window, staring. This time, though, it was worse. Even from this distance, I could tell they weren't just looking out the window. They were looking directly at me. I shut the blinds, heart racing, and went downstairs to tell Sarah. "We're planting trees," I said. "First thing next spring. I don't care how much it costs. We need to block that window." The next few days, we tried to avoid looking outside. We avoided the backyard altogether. But one night, around 11 p.m., we heard a strange knocking sound. It wasn't coming from the front door or even the side door. It was coming from the backyard. "Wait here," I told Sarah, trying to sound braver than I felt. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, baseball bat, and headed downstairs. The knocking grew louder as I approached the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the sound wasn't just random tapping. It was deliberate, insistent. Someone was knocking on the glass of one of the backyard windows. The blinds were drawn, and I had no intention of opening them. Instead, I turned on the backyard light, hoping to scare off whoever or whatever was out there. The knocking stopped instantly. I stood there, frozen, listening to the silence. I didn't dare look out the window. My mind was racing with thoughts of those figures at the window, and now I was terrified they were somehow in the yard. I went back upstairs and told Sarah everything was fine, that I had scared whoever it was away. But the truth was, I hadn't seen anyone. I didn't know who or what had been out there. For the next 2 weeks, things were quiet. Figures at the window seemed to disappear, and we started to feel a little more comfortable. But then, late one night, we were woken by the sound of yelling. It was coming from the house behind ours. I opened our bedroom window and listened. The screams were muffled but loud, like someone was in a lot of pain. The yelling continued for a few minutes, and then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. We debated calling the police, but in the end, we didn't. Something about that house made me hesitate, as if involving the authorities would make things worse. The next morning, I checked the window again. The house was as still and quiet as ever. No sign of movement, no sign of life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened in that house. And then, a few nights later, it happened again. We were asleep when I heard a loud thud from the backyard. I bolted upright, my heart racing, and looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I nudged Sarah awake, and we both listened in the dark. There it was again. A thud, followed by scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the ground. I grabbed the baseball bat and crept downstairs. The backyard light was still on, but the yard itself was empty. The noise, however, continued, coming from behind the fence, from the house where those figures had been watching us. I stood at the window, staring into the darkness, my breath fogging up the glass. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. Figure. Man, standing in the shadows near the fence, staring at our house. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was one of the people from the window. He stood there, motionless for what felt like an eternity, and then slowly he raised his hand and waved. I backed away from the window, my blood turning to ice. I ran upstairs, grabbed Sarah, and we left the house that night, not bothering to pack anything. We never went back. A few days later, I checked the local news. There was a report of a body found in the drainage basin behind the houses. They didn't give any details, but I knew. Somehow, I knew it was connected to the house behind ours. We moved far away after that, to a place where the neighbors don't watch from their windows, and there are no dark houses lurking behind ours. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up and wonder if they're still watching, and if one day, they'll find us again.